As I was considering today's parable, it seemed to me that it reads a bit like a drama. I think many parables do, if you think of them this way. We're directed by the opening remark. This one's going to be about self-righteousness. We're introduced to the main characters, a Pharisee and a tax collector. They enter, or they are placed, on the stage of the temple. And don't forget, this drama follows hot on the heels of the previous one. It seems to me this is almost like scene 2, and last week was scene 1. And for those of you that don't remember last week, we had a judge who feared neither God nor people and took a good long while to decide to administer justice to the widow, and the motivation was self-preservation. It's curious to imagine a parable in this guise as a drama, an enacted drama, and for this to be a teaching tool. Although, if you think about it, for those who listened to Jesus in that time and place, what he was describing would have been a context very familiar to them. So maybe thinking of a drama as a teaching tool is just curious to us when we apply it to a religious text. Because if we step outside a religious context, we're more than aware how formational drama is and has been, particularly in the West. We only have to think of the influence of William Shakespeare. As Cate writes in her book, his plays have for 400 years captivated theatre-goers worldwide, thanks to their unforgettable characters, gripping plots and poetic verse. But what I didn't know until I read Kate Hayworth's book was that to keep his actors on their toes, Shakespeare handed each member of the troupe only their own lines and cues to learn. He intentionally left them in the dark about the unfolding plot. How would you like to go onto the stage with just your part and a cue and no idea what's going to happen? But apparently, soon after his death, some rather overzealous editors added in complete lists of characters, and in plays such as The Tempest introduced many parts along with their telltale trays. The effect of providing such telltale character trays was to influence the way the characters interacted or expected to interact with one another, so it shifted that balance between character and plot. She continues, the play becomes pregnant with plot and the story ahead almost self-fulfilling. But to return to today's parable, as the drama unfolds, it is assumed that we know something of the characters, is it not? And that we play our part in determining exactly what the plot is. We are asked to fill in a lot of gaps, and we do so, and I think those of us who have been around this text for a while have done so for many years. We make meaning and we find significance for ourselves, and maybe for others, depending on our context, our level of knowledge, what we need to hear or we want to hear at any given time. And of course, because this parable is put in the mouth of Jesus, and because it is embedded in a gospel and scripture, it has heightened significance. And for those of us who believe it's about God, it means it matters a lot. We want to learn and to understand how to grow to be well with God, aligned, made right, justified in relationship with God, to quote the gospel. Well, the parable begins a bit like one of those often racist or sexist jokes. One day there were 2 men who went into not the pub, the temple. As far as we know, this is something they regularly did. A bit like coming to church, it was their practice. As far as we can tell, they don't interact with one another at all. All we know is what goes on inside their head because of the dialogue Jesus gives us. Look around. Can you even imagine how many dialogues are going on in here inside people's heads? Not even talking about the dialogues going on inside your own head. Maybe this parable is about a bit of a reminder to pay attention to why we came here and what we're doing here. Each character in this drama stands before God. They have each come, they are each seeking something. Yes, we do have to have Jesus tell us what they're praying or asking, but what do we actually know about these characters? So I want to take a quick character check. First, let's think about the Pharisee. How many of you know much about Pharisees? In the Gospels, they often appear as the influential arch enemies of Jesus. The Pharisees were actually a lay movement, and they placed emphasis on the Torah, particularly the importance of the purity code for everyday holiness. In their opinion, holiness wasn't just for priests, and it wasn't just at the temple. By observing the purity code, they had, in their opinion, every member of the people of God might participate in the holiness of God. Pharisees held to a liberal interpretation of the Scripture. The aim of Pharisaic law was to make observance of the Torah available to all. I think some of us might align a bit with that sentiment. Conflicts between the Pharisees and the disciples of Jesus came to a head after Jesus' death, when the Jesus movement began to accept Gentiles into membership without demanding either circumcision or that they observe the purity code. So these sorts of controversies are reflected in the way the Pharisees have come to be portrayed in the New Testament. What about tax collectors? During the Herodian period, Julius Caesar made the rulers of the new Jewish state responsible for the taxes, and the Herodian rulers farmed the taxes out to individual farmers or to associations. So tax collectors, as we know, were seen as collaborators with the much-hated Romans. And as the burdens of taxation became ever more intolerable, the tax collectors became more hateful and a more dreaded personality. At times, they contrived to extract payments by torture. And since tax collectors were classed with robbers, Talmudic law disqualified them from acting as witnesses, and neither was their money accepted for charity. So despite, as we listen to today's parable, our perhaps attraction to the tax collector character depicted, they weren't actually very humble or simple people. Both Pharisee and tax collector come to the temple, and both of them leave. As far as we know, neither of them changed their jobs or their allegiances. What Jesus comments on is their changed orientation before God. And as far as I can tell, Jesus doesn't pass judgment as to whether one is right or one is wrong, whether one is good or one is bad. Simply that one left justified, made right in their relationship with God, and one did not. What is at stake, it would seem, is the alignment of each character in their relationship with God. Yes, it does say that those who exalt themselves will be humbled, while those who humble themselves will be exalted. But is this about the way they are? About who we are, how we are ourselves, who truly we are before God? Does this parable speak about our inner orientation toward God? Yes, I think it does. But also I think it talks about how this comes to outwork in our orientation toward the world, of our tendency to think that we know. And then we create a world to support what we think we know. And then to generate belief systems and determine practices and things that we do that we deem as correct practice. That again reflects our self-understanding. And very, very easily we come to defend our position. And at the same time, we seal ourselves inside those worlds that we create. As I began, I suggested we might understand today's parable as scene 2 of a drama. In scene 1, a judge was named unjust, true, but he wasn't named unjust until he administered justice. I wonder, is that because he knew how to be just, and mostly he chose not to be? Scene 2, today's parable, might this suggest that we know how to be transparent and honest before God, yet too often we choose the safety of measurable and correct behaviours and right practices. We limit ourselves to safe parameters. This isn't wrong. But potentially by doing this, we deny ourselves the extravagance of God for us and for others. When we diminish our world or limit it to our safe self-creation, we diminish not only who we can be, but also who others can be and what the world can be. Is it enough to act correctly and not risk the disruption of an opened heart? As they left the temple, these two men of faith, one had opened himself to be changed. One had determined he and his ways need not be changed. Where, or perhaps when, do we open ourselves in an honest declaration of how we are? Acknowledge perhaps our sense of incompleteness that too often our actions contribute toward. Not that by them they make us less beloved of God, but that sometimes our choices diminish us and diminish our capacity to know and to live as ones who are divinely beloved. When we can be honest, we open up in us a space for transformation, for being transformed, for changing. When we know this and experience this, we discover we can choose to participate in change. We can choose to participate in changing ourselves. We can choose to participate in the changing, the necessary changing and transforming of our world. But to return to Shakespeare keeping his actors on his toes, he was also known to say, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women are merely players." Imagine if we understood ourselves this way, that each of us has a part to play in the life of the world, that we know our part, or we come to learn it, and we work out the unfolding of life as we interact with each other player and with our world. The drama of life unfolds in the interaction between us rather than being predetermined. It leaves a space for grace, or if you like Leonard Cohen's words, for the light, crack for the light to get in. That space between us, for relationships to develop and evolve in that moment of meeting. That life is an unfolding with particular players who each moment are creating life within their unique context. Imagine what that might free us to create for the good of the world.